The galaxy was dying, and everyone pretended not to see it. From the core to the furthest reaches of the spiral arms, stars winked out centuries too early. Systems that should have burned for billions of years were collapsing into frozen husks, leaving behind only corpses of ice and silence. Civilizations watched from there and temples, offering endless prayers to inevitability. "The cycle turns," the monarchs said. "The galaxy fades as it always has and always will." But the humans, so new to the galactic stage, so small, so unthroned, were not content with the comfort of resignation. They had not clawed their way out of gravity wells, not torn fire from the atom and sails from the void, only to lie down and wait for the dark. Captain Rains stood at the observation deck of the dauntless Horizon, a ship that had once been a mining barge before humans had stripped it down and rebuilt it as an exploration cruiser. Out ahead stretched a star that should not have been dying, and yet it was. Its light guttered like a candle in a storm, flaring weakly, spasming in bursts of ultraviolet rage before sliding back into dull embers. "Status?" she asked, her voice low, though the crew already knew. The science officer lieutenant spoke with a grim edge. "Core collapse accelerating. We calculate less than 20 years of stable fusion left. By the books, it should have another 5 billion. Silence filled the deck. The crew were all young, not by choice but by necessity. Few veterans had volunteered for such missions into the quiet, fatting frontier. But even youth could feel the weight of what they were witnessing. Another light going out, another reminder that the galaxy was slowly, inexorably freezing to death. Rains forced herself to look, to see, because if no one did, then the darkness would win before the fight ever began. It wasn't just one star. Probes had already hundreds, then thousands of similar anomalies, too many, far too many to explain away as natural chance. The oldest civilizations, the crowned empires with their libraries of ancient charts, dismissed human warnings. "Stars die," they said with the weary arrogance of those who had outlived countless ages. "This is the way." But Rains couldn't believe it. Not anymore, not with this many coincidences. "Bring up the collapse map," she ordered. The bloomed to life, painting the darkness across the galaxy in ghostly light. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Stars weren't failing at random. They were failing in waves, spreading outward like the ripples of some vast, unseen hand pressing down on the galaxy. The crew murmured in unease, looked pale. "Captain, that's migration, that's it spreading." Rains exhaled slowly. "Not migration," she said, "it's hunting." The word froze the room. None of them wanted to admit what it implied, but every one of them felt it. The stars were being extinguished, not by time, not by entropy, but by something alive. Something feeding. The captain turned from the map and studied her crew. They were frightened, but more than that, they were angry. Humanity had always been prey to something larger, the storms of nature, the tyrannies of empires, the void of space itself. But each time they had refused to accept it. They had fought, adapted, clawed their way forward. Now before them stood the greatest predator of all. "Transmit our data to Sol Command," Rains ordered. "Full priority." The comms officer hesitated. "Captain, do you think the Council will even listen this time?" Rains allowed herself a thin smile. "They don't have to, we're not asking permission." For a long while no one spoke. They simply watched as the star convulsed, flaring one last time before collapsing into darkness. A hush fell over the deck, heavier than silence. A sun had died and the void felt hungrier for it. But Rains and her crew did not look away. They logged every flicker, every tremor of impossible physics, every whisper of the void. They carried it all with them, not as despair, but as fuel. Because if the galaxy was going to its lonely end, then humanity, crownless, throneless, ignored and mocked, would fight to drag it back. The stars might fall, but humanity had decided they would not fall quietly. The council chamber of the elder races was a cathedral carved from the bones of a dead moon, gilded in light stolen from a captured star. Thrones rose in tiers like jagged teeth, each occupied by the monarchs of civilizations that had ruled long before humanity learned to spark fire. Their crowns gleamed in the artificial sun, their robes heavy with history. To them, time itself was a kingdom they had inherited. Into this sanctum walked the humans, uncrowned, unarmored, and unwelcome. Captain Rains and her delegation advanced beneath the gaze of hundreds of alien eyes, some bright with curiosity, most dulled with scorn. Their boots echoed against polished stone, a sound far too loud for a chamber that had grown accustomed to the soft silks of courtiers and monarchs. When the human envoy reached the center dais, Rains lifted her chin and spoke. "Honored sovereigns, we bring evidence of a crisis that threatens every star, every people, every crown. The galaxy is being consumed, not by time but by something alive." The chamber rippled with murmurs, hisses from serpentine rulers, clicks of disbelief, a low grinding chuckle from the crystalline monarch of Prime. Rains gestured to her science officer, triggered filling the vaulted chamber with a projection of the spiral galaxy. The points of light dimmed one by one, vanishing in an unmistakable pattern, waves of extinction spreading outward, slow but inevitable. "Stars are not dying at random," Rains pressed. "They are being extinguished. This is predation, and it is accelerating." For a heartbeat, silence ruled the chamber. Then laughter began. It started with the scaled emperor of, a hiss that swelled into a full-bodied roar. The matriarch of joined, her mandibles clattering in mirth. Soon the chamber was filled with the mocking chorus of rulers who had outlived countless dooms. The Empress of the Thousand Suns raised her jeweled hand for silence, though her eyes still glittered with amusement. "Humans," she said, her voice smooth and cold. "Children of a single yellow star, you presume to instruct those who have shepherded civilizations since before your kind crawled from your oceans." Rain stood unflinching. "We presume nothing, we bring facts." The crystalline monarch leaned forward, light refracting through his jagged body. "Stars die, little mammal. That is the way. Entropy is a throne none may topple. You mistake the natural for the unnatural." Rains held his gaze. "Then why do they die in waves? Why do they fall in patterns? Entropy is chaos, not design." The chamber stirred again, though this time uneasily. Yet the Empress laughed once more, dismissing the tension with a wave. "Bold words, but you are crownless, unthroned. You have no right to speak of the galaxy's fate. Return to your backwater and leave the burden of eternity to those born to it." Every word struck like a blade, but Rains had prepared for this. Humanity had known their plea would be mocked. Still, it stung to hear laughter when she had seen a star die with her own eyes. Muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear, "They'll let it all burn rather than admit they're afraid." Perhaps he was right. Rains bowed stiffly, the gesture as much defiance as respect. "Then you condemn yourselves to silence. But know this, humanity will not wait for crowns to fall before acting. We do not need thrones to fight for what we love." Gasps echoed. Some monarchs bristled, others smirked, but none offered aid. The humans turned and walked from the chamber, their footsteps echoing louder than before, as though daring the silence to challenge them. Yet not every gaze was mocking. From the shadowed tiers above, a young alien prince watched them leave. His crown was still too large for his brow, his robes too heavy for his shoulders. He had been raised on stories of his empire's eternal glory. But tonight, as the human burned in his mind, those stories felt like lies. When the humans departed into the cold corridors of the council station, they found him waiting. His attendants hissed for him to return, but he ignored them, stepping forward with nervous defiance. "I know what you said is true," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There are records hidden forbidden. My people destroyed the archives, but I've seen fragments. They speak of a hunger that comes when the stars grow old. A devourer." Rain studied him carefully. He was young, too young to carry the weight of betrayal. But his eyes burned with the same stubborn light she had seen in her own crew. "Why tell us?" she asked. The prince swallowed hard. "Because the crowns will never listen. They've already decided the galaxy's fate, but I think you're mad enough to fight it." Behind him, his attendants began to shout, the sound of approaching guards rising. The prince pressed a data crystal into Rains's palm. "Take this, before they silence me too." And then he was gone, dragged back into the gilded shadows of his people's throne. Rains closed her hand around the crystal. The council had laughed, but the laughter rang hollow now. Somewhere in hidden archives and forbidden truths, humanity's suspicion had been confirmed. The galaxy was dying, and something was feeding. The dauntless horizon drifted at the edge of a dead system, its sensors drinking in the silence. Once, 7 planets had circled a white star here. Now only debris remained, a frozen graveyard orbiting a lightless void where a star had once burned. Captain Rain stood on the bridge with the data crystal clenched in her hand. The alien prince's warning had echoed in her thoughts for days. A devourer. A hunger when the stars grow old. His words had carried the weight of fear, but also of forbidden truth. "Upload the archive," she ordered. Lieutenant slotted the crystal into the console. The ship sputtered, filling the room with fractured symbols, broken text, and incomplete images. A tapestry of ancient warnings unfolded before them, records written in languages long extinct, many of them deliberately corrupted. The fragments told the same story, civilizations rising, flourishing, then falling into darkness not by war, not by plague, not by entropy, but by something vast that came when the stars dimmed. Each entry ended the same way, silence. The last fragment was the clearest. It showed a star flaring bright, then collapsing inward unnaturally fast, as though something had reached in and stolen its fire. 3 words pulsed in translation, the silence between. The crew shifted uneasily. Even the ship seemed colder as the words lingered. Exhaled slowly. It's not just extinction, it's consumption, it's feeding. Rains turned to her crew. If this is true, then every dying star we've logged isn't a tragedy, it's a murder. Before anyone could respond, the ship's alarms shrieked. Sensors flared red. "Captain," the tactical officer barked. "Energy surge dead center where the star collapsed." The bloomed to life, showing the black void at the system's heart. For a moment it was empty, then the shadows twisted. At first it looked like nothing, just a distortion, a ripple in the dark. But then it moved against the laws of physics, sliding, coiling, poolsing. The void itself bent around it, light refusing to touch its edges. The crew watched in horrified silence. "My gods," whispered, "it's still here." The distortion convulsed, and the ship's systems went haywire, lights flickering, instruments screaming false readings. Rains clutched the rail as the dauntless horizon groaned under unseen pressure. "Shields up, engines at full," she barked. The ship lurched forward, engines straining. Behind them, the distortion swelled, tendrils of warped gravity lashing outward. Chunks of planetary debris shattered like glass as invisible hands crushed them to dust. "It's locking onto us," the helm officer shouted, mass distortion increasing. The bridge lights flickered again, and for a heartbeat, every screen went black. Then a sound filled the ship, not noise exactly, but a vibration that rattled bones, a resonance that gnawed at thought. It wasn't sound at all. It was hunger, translated into something the human mind could almost comprehend. The crew clutched their heads, some crying out, some falling silent. Rains forced herself to stand. "Fight it, focus on the mission." Her voice cut through the paralysis, snapping the bridge back to motion. The engines roared, tearing the dauntless horizon free from the system's edge just as the shadow lashed again. A moonlet crumbled in their place, torn into a spiral of dust. Then, as suddenly as it had surged, the distortion stilled. It recoiled, folding in on itself until the void was once more empty. The alarms fell silent, though the crew did not. Their ragged breaths filled the bridge, their faces pale, their eyes wide. His voice trembled. It let us go." Rain studied the screen, her jaw tight. "No, it tasted us, and decided we weren't worth the effort, not yet." The crew shifted uneasily, but no one argued. Rains turned toward the archive, still flickering on the ancient records had warned of the silence between, and now they had seen it with their own eyes. "This isn't entropy, it isn't fate, it's a predator, and predators don't stop until everything is gone." She looked each of her crew in the eye, her voice steel. "The crowned empires may laugh at us, but they haven't seen what we've seen. The galaxy won't fight, so we'll have to, alone if necessary." The words settled heavy in the air, but beneath the fear something else took root, defiance. Humanity had faced predators before, bigger, stronger, faster. Each time they had learned, each time they had fought back. Rains clenched her fists. The galaxy might belong to emperors, to monarchs, to dynasties wrapped in jewels and arrogance. But the fight for its survival now belonged to the crownless. And humanity was ready to answer hunger with fire. The void had teeth, and humanity had seen them. The encounter with the silence between was burned into every mind aboard the dauntless horizon. The crowned rulers could laugh from their thrones, but Rains and her crew knew better. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. And now humanity prepared to fight. Not in gilded palaces or mighty citadels, but in scrapyards, forgotten stations, and drifting colonies where no crown dared to look. The shipyards of Sgrave had once been a graveyard of industry. Rusted hulls floated in orbit, stripped of value long ago. But now, sparks filled the dark as welders in patched suits clambered across derelicts, bolting cannons onto cargo freighters and jury-rigging armor from mining plates. Captain Rains watched from the catwalk, the smell of ozone and burning metal thick in the recycled air. "Beautiful, isn't it?" muttered at her side. She gave him a sharp look. He grinned faintly. Not beautiful like the monarch's ships, but beautiful because it works. Rains allowed herself a small nod. The empires had their war machines, massive dreadnoughts plated in ceremonial gold, fleets built to project glory. Humanity didn't need glory. Humanity needed weapons that fired true, armor that held long enough, engines that could run on fumes if they had to. And so they built them. Not thrones but warships, not crowns but shields. Recruitment was easier than expected. The galaxies forgotten were hungry for purpose. Refugees who had lost everything to dead stars. Miners abandoned by their empires. Traders cast adrift by shrinking trade routes. Even pirates who had once preyed on the weak now found themselves with nothing to plunder. They came to humanity because no one else wanted them. They stayed because the humans refused to give up. Rains watched them drill, aliens with spindly arms, thick-skinned miners, humans in patched armor, all learning to fight side by side. They were awkward, chaotic, undisciplined. But when she saw them raise their weapons together, she felt a surge of something the monarchs had forgotten long ago: raw determination. Their first test came sooner than expected. Scouts detected distortions in a nearby system, shadows where light bent wrong, signs of the silence stirring. Most of the new fleet was still untested, half their ships barely holding together. Conventional wisdom said to retreat, to wait, to call for aid from the crowned empires. But conventional wisdom had laughed at them. Rains gathered her commanders in the dim light of the dauntless Horizon's war room. The hollow map showed the system: a small red dwarf, 3 rocky planets, and the growing void twisting space around them. "We're not ready," one commander argued, a miner with arms like tree trunks. "We'll lose ships." "We'll lose ships whether we fight or not," Rains replied. "But if we do nothing, we lose the galaxy." Silence followed, then spoke softly but firmly. "Better to bleed now and learn than bleed later when there's nothing left to save." One by one, the commanders nodded. The decision was made. The battle was chaos. The fleet dropped from on the system's edge, and at once the void stirred. Tendrils of warped gravity lashed outward, dragging asteroids into ribbons. Whole sensor arrays failed as the shadow bent reality itself. Rains gave the order. Freighters turned gunships opened fire, their cannons blazing white fire into the dark. The shots vanished into nothing until one struck, and the void rippled like disturbed water. "Mark that," Rains barked. "They can bleed." The crews roared. For the first time in eons, the galaxy struck back. The fight was brutal. 3 ships were crushed like paper, their crews lost to the silence. Another detonated its fuel tanks deliberately, taking a piece of the void with it. Every victory was paid in blood, every tactic improvised mid-battle. But when the shadows finally recoiled, collapsing back into the nothing that spawned them, the fleet still floated. Damaged, but alive. On the bridge, the survivors cheered raggedly. Rains didn't smile. She couldn't, Too many names would never return, but beneath the grief was something stronger. Hope. For the first time, they had proven the enemy wasn't invincible. The silence between could be hurt. Rains looked at her weary crew, at the patched ships drifting beside them. They were not crowned. They were not chosen, but they were alive, and alive meant they could fight again. She turned to, send word to every corner of the galaxy. The crownless struck first, and were just getting started. The galaxy would know. Humanity had raised an army from the forgotten, and they would not go quietly. The news spread faster than light. Not the news of another dead star. Those were common now, too common to raise alarm among the empires. But the news that a fleet of outcasts and crownless humans had fought the darkness and survived. The council chambers that had once echoed with laughter now trembled with unease. Monarchs who had dismissed humanity with a sneer now demanded reports. Ancient empires that had claimed eternity now whispered like frightened children. But it was already too late. The system fell first. It had been fortified for 100,000 years, rings of defense platforms, fleets of warships adorned in sacred banners. None of it mattered. The silence came. Sensors detected distortions in the void, but they dismissed them. By the time the first platform was torn apart without a shot fired, the rest of the system was already lost. Tendrils of warped space carved through fleets, bending ships until their hulls snapped like twigs. The burned silently as its star dimmed to nothing. Transmission fragments leaked to the rest of the galaxy. The last image. The matriarch herself, mandibles spread in defiance, her jeweled crown tumbling into the void as the palace collapsed around her. The galaxy shuddered, the crowned could fall. In the ruins of Sgrave, the uncrowned army watched the feeds in silence. Rains felt no triumph, only grim confirmation. The monarchs had mocked humanity, and now one of their own had been devoured. She saw the fear in her recruits' eyes, the refugees who had lost homes, the miners who had lost families, the pirates who had lost everything but their ships. "Let them see," she said quietly. "Let them all see what waits for them." Frowned, "Do you think they'll come to us now?" Rains shook her head. "Not yet, not until their thrones are in flames, crowns weigh heavier than survival." She was right. The Empress of the Thousand Suns summoned the council in desperation. Her voice thundered across the chamber. "We must act. The silence is no myth. They are gone." But instead of unity, panic fractured the council. Some rulers demanded retreat, seal their borders, abandon the frontier, let the younger stars burn to buy time. Others demanded appeasement, as though the hunger could be bribed with offerings. A few whispered of abandoning the spiral entirely, fleeing into the void beyond. And through it all, humanity's name lingered in every debate like an uninvited ghost. The crownless struck first. The crownless wounded it. The crownless fought while we did nothing. For monarchs who measured themselves in legacy, the shame was unbearable. The reckoning came at prime. The crystalline monarch who had laughed the loudest at humanity's warning assembled his fleets. 1,000 glittering dreadnoughts, their hulls sharp as razors, their cores fueled by captured suns. He broadcast across the galaxy, "I will end this farce. The silence between will shatter against the crown of as all pretenders have before." The uncrowned army watched the broadcast from their patched ships, holding their breath. If the triumphed, perhaps the galaxy might still be saved. But when the silence came, the dreadnoughts burned like paper lanterns. It did not matter how many cannons they fired or how bright their engines burned. The void twisted, shadows coiled, and the proud armada became shards of crystal drifting in eternal silence. The monarch himself transmitted one last time, his crystalline body cracking under impossible pressure. "They hunger for light. All crowns are ash." Then he was gone. For the first time, the crowned empires could no longer deny. Their fleets were powerless, their thrones no shield. And so, grudgingly, bitterly, they turned to the crownless. Envoys arrived at Sgrave, cloaked in shame and arrogance, their words thick with condescension but tinged with desperation. They demanded knowledge of how humanity had hurt the silence. They demanded fleets, weapons, leadership. Rains listened, her expression unreadable. The monarchs who had once mocked her people now stood humbled, stripped of their illusions. But she gave them no comfort. "You waited until crowns shattered before you believed," she said. "Now you want us to save you. We will fight, yes, but not for your thrones. We fight for the galaxy itself. If you want to survive, you will fight with us. No crowns, no titles, only soldiers." The envoys recoiled, scandalized, but they had no choice. Pride was ashes now. And so the galaxy shifted. The uncrowned army swelled as even the proud were forced to kneel, not to humanity but to survival. Thrones cracked, crowns tarnished, legacies crumbled. And through the ruin, the crownless led the charge. But even as their fleets grew, so too did the darkness. The silence was adapting, feeding faster, hungrier. And somewhere in the shadows, it whispered across the void in 1,000 dead tongues. "The crownless burn, your defiance feeds us." The war room aboard the dauntless Horizon was a chaos of voices. Commanders from 6 species shouted across the table, their words sharp with fear and desperation. Some demanded stronger fleets, others cried for retreat, still others argued over who should be sacrificed first. Captain Rains let them rage. The galaxy was burning, and every crowned ruler who had joined the coalition carried more pride than pragmatism. They still thought survival was a matter of strategy, of maneuvers and firepower, but Rains knew better. The silence between could not be beaten in battle. They had seen it devour empires whole. They had watched it bend reality around itself, pulling fleets into nothing. Every clash was a delaying action, nothing more. Humanity had survived because they adapted, because they were stubborn enough to improvise. But improvisation alone wouldn't save the galaxy. It was who broke the shouting match. He slammed onto the table, projecting of the galactic core. "Enough," he snapped. "We can't keep patching holes in a sinking ship. We need to stop the tide itself." The chamber quieted, if only from shock at his audacity. Tap the projection, zooming into the dense heart of the Milky Way. The silence feeds on stars, but what if we feed the galaxy instead? The core is dying. It's producing fewer stars each cycle. If we seed it with exotic matter, we could reignite star formation, flood the galaxy with new light faster than the silence can consume it. The map shifted, displaying streams of hypothetical new stars blazing outward from the core like arteries of fire. For a moment the room was silent, then the arguments began anew. "Impossible," spat the Empress of the 1,000 Suns. "You speak of remaking creation itself. That is the domain of gods, not vermin." The crystalline envoy hissed, his cracked body still from the fall of Prime. "Even if your madness could work, what vessel could carry such matter? The gravity alone would crush fleets." Rains finally rose, her voice calm but carrying across the chamber. "There is a way. We've been experimenting with containment drives, salvaged from mining rigs and stabilizers. If we build a vessel large enough, armored enough, we can carry the payload into the galactic core. One ship, one mission." The room erupted again, this time in outrage. "One ship. A suicide. Human madness." Rain slammed her fist against the table. The echoes silenced them. "Yes, a suicide mission, but if we succeed, the galaxy lives. If we fail, it dies anyway. Those are the only two outcomes left." The weight of her words settled like ash. The monarchs bristled, unwilling to sacrifice, unwilling to admit they had no alternatives. But the younger commanders, the refugees, the uncrowned, all looked at her with something else in their eyes. Not disbelief, not scorn, hope. That night the plan spread through the fleet. Not officially, there was no proclamation, no rallying speech, but by whispers in mess halls, by schematics passed between engineers, by stories told from bunk to bunk. A vessel, vast and armored, would dive into the core carrying the galaxy's last hope. Few expected to return. And yet the volunteers came. A miner who had lost his family to a dead son. A warrior whose was already ash. An engineer, ashamed of his people's pride, determined to make amends. Humans, aliens, hybrids of both, each willing to climb aboard a ship that had no name, only a purpose. When the lists filled faster than anyone expected, whispered to Rains, "They're not afraid of dying anymore." She nodded grimly, because dying is no longer the worst outcome, silence is. On the eve of construction, the alien prince appeared again, cloaked and trembling. He had risked everything to find them. "You can't do this," he said, thrusting another data crystal into Rains's hands. "The archives, they speak of others who tried, long ago when the galaxy first dimmed. They built a vessel too. They dove into the core, and they failed." Rains studied him, her jaw tightening. "Why?" The prince's voice shook. "Because the silence does not live outside the galaxy. It lives within it, within us. It will not let you succeed." The words chilled the chamber. For the first time, even Rains had no answer. She looked out the viewport toward the galaxy's glowing heart. A mission of fire and sacrifice lay ahead. Maybe it had been tried before, maybe it had failed. But humanity had built its legacy on defying the impossible. And if the crowned would not lead, then the crownless would dive into the core themselves. The ship had no crown, no banners, no gilded armor. It was a colossus of welded hulls, stitched together from wrecks and relics of forgotten wars. They named it the Unbroken Dawn, a vessel born of desperation, held together by the will of those who refused to vanish quietly. Its mission was simple: dive into the galactic core and seed it with exotic matter, reigniting. Its mission was impossible: survive the silence long enough to deliver the payload. And still, thousands volunteered. The Allied fleet gathered at the rim of the core, the sight beyond their hulls both beautiful and terrifying. The galactic heart was a storm of light and gravity, stars packed so densely that their fire bled into one another, a river of brilliance barely restrained by physics. Yet even here, shadows coiled, ripples of absence winding through the blaze. The silence had come to stop them. Sensors screamed with distortions, space itself warped. Shapes loomed in the void, too vast to comprehend, outlines shifting like the memory of a nightmare. They were not ships. They were not even creatures. They were hunger given form. "Contact," reported the helm officer, his voice tight. "They're here." Rain stood on the bridge of the dauntless horizon, her gaze steady. "Then so are we." The fleet surged forward. The first clash was catastrophic. Tendrils of warped gravity lashed outward, crumpling frigates in seconds. Shards of alien hulls spiraled into the blaze. The crowned empires screamed in terror as their once-proud dreadnoughts buckled like paper under the weight of impossible pressure. But the uncrowned fought differently. They didn't cling to tradition, to formation, to honor. They adapted. They broke apart into swarms, striking from angles the silence didn't anticipate. Freighters turned warships rammed into tendrils, detonating fuel to tear rents in the shadows. Miners, ships drilled into fragments of carving wounds where no weapon could reach. Every loss taught them something. Every death brought a heartbeat more. Amid the chaos, the Unbroken Dawn lumbered forward, its engines howling, its armor peeling under unseen claws. Its escorts, half human, half alien, formed a battered wall around it, their only purpose to buy time. Rains's voice cut across the comms. "Protect the Dawn. If it reaches the core, we win. If it falls, the galaxy dies." Her words spread like fire. Crews who had never spoken the same language understood her perfectly. They fought with desperation, not for thrones, but for survival, for light, for every star still burning in the void. The silence adapted. Shadows thickened, weaving nets of absence to ensnare the dawn. Ships vanished screaming as they were dragged into nothing. Rains knew they couldn't break through by brute force. She opened the fleet-wide channel. "All ships scatter and burn, bleed for the dawn." The fleet obeyed. Ships peeled away, igniting reactors, flaring weapons, every explosion tearing holes in the shadow web. The path cleared for a heartbeat, just long enough. "The dawn is through," shouted. Cheers erupted across the fleet, but the celebration was short-lived. The largest shadow moved. It unfolded from the void, dwarfing even the dawn, a shape that swallowed light, its tendrils stretching across half the core. The silence itself had arrived. Inside the dawn, the volunteers braced for the final run. The engines screamed, the hull groaned, alarms wailed. and still they pressed forward, carrying the galaxy's last hope. On the dauntless horizon, Rains watched the dawn vanish into the blaze of the core, shadows closing around it. "Signal them," she ordered. The comm crackled, then cleared. A single voice came through, the commander of the dawn, weary but unbroken. "We're going in, for every crown, every world, every star." The transmission ended. The fleet held its breath as the core flared. Light erupted, brighter than any had seen in ages. Tendrils of shadow thrashed, recoiling from the ignition. Stars roared back to life, waves of brilliance cascading outward. The galaxy lived. On the bridge, the crew cheered, cried, collapsed in exhausted relief. The silence had been wounded, driven back its feast. But as the light spread, a final message cut across every comm channel, carried on a frequency no crown had ever used before. A human voice, broken by static, speaking from the dawn's last moments. "We found it. The silence isn't outside us, it's inside us." Then only silence. The galaxy was reborn in fire, but the victory carried a shadow of dread. Humanity had delivered light to the stars, yet in doing so, they had uncovered a darker truth. The greatest predator was not only in the void, it was within. The galaxy burned with light again. Stars that had withered flickered back to life, and newborn suns ignited where only darkness had reigned. Whole sectors bathed in brilliance, worlds once abandoned now kissed by dawn. For the first time in centuries, hope radiated across the spiral. But hope was not without shadow. The unbroken dawn was gone, consumed in its plunge into the galactic heart. No wreckage, no signal, only the last transmission etched into every commander's memory. "The silence isn't outside us, it's inside us." No one understood what it meant, but no one could forget it. In the aftermath, the crowned empires convened again. Their palaces were cracked, their fleets in ruins, but their pride clung on like rust. They debated furiously, their voices laced with the same arrogance that had nearly doomed the galaxy. "We must restore order. A new council must rise. Someone must claim victory and shape the peace." The argument boiled down to one question: who would wear the crown of savior? Yet when they turned to humanity, expecting demands for dominion, they found nothing of the sort. Rain stood before them, weary, her uniform torn from weeks of battle. Behind her, the faces of every species that had fought, every crownless soldier who had bled for the galaxy. "No throne," she said. "No crown, that was never why we fought. We lit the stars because someone had to, nothing more." The chamber erupted in scandalized murmurs. No throne, no crown, what species in history had saved the galaxy and not demanded dominion? But humanity turned and walked away, leaving the rulers to choke on their shattered crowns. Life staggered back into motion. Trade routes reopened, fleets limped home, planets dared to rebuild. Songs were written about the dawn, poems about the crownless who had saved the spiral. Monuments rose, some to honor humanity, others to glorify the fallen, still others to remind the living that the silence would return. And beneath it all, the whispers grew. "The silence isn't outside us, it's inside us." Rains couldn't escape those words. In her dreams, she saw tendrils coiling not in space, but in hearts. In the ambition of monarchs clutching their crowns, in the fear that drove whole worlds to abandon their neighbors, in the endless hunger for power, for survival at any cost. What if the silence wasn't a predator in the void, but the reflection of the galaxy's own nature, hunger made flesh, greed given form? What if the crownless hadn't destroyed it at all, only starved it temporarily by lighting new suns? That thought chilled her more than the void ever had. A year later, on a nameless station orbiting a newborn star, she met again. His hair had gone gray, his voice rough, but his eyes burned with the same stubborn fire. "They're already trying to build thrones again," he said, disgust thick in his voice. "The Empress of the Thousand Suns has declared herself Mother of Dawn. The crystalline survivors are crowning a new prime. It's like they learned nothing." Rain sipped her drink, staring at the blazing star outside the viewport. "Maybe they didn't, maybe they can't." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. But we did. We know the truth. The silence, it'll come back, and when it does, crowns won't save anyone. She met his gaze. There was no despair there, only certainty. No thrones, she said quietly. No crowns, just a species fighting, that's what we are. And that was enough. Beyond the station, the newborn star pulsed, its light fierce and defiant. Yet in its corona, if one looked closely, shadows rippled. Reminders. The silence was not gone. It had only been driven inward, into the marrow of every species, into every hungry heart. The galaxy was alive again, yes, but alive with something restless, something inevitable. Humanity had lit the stars. They had refused crowns, refused thrones, refused the arrogance of rule, and in doing so they had given the galaxy time. But time was not victory. Time was a question. When the silence rose again, and it would, who would stand against it? Who would dive once more into the heart of fire? The galaxy whispered no answer, but humanity, crownless and unbowed, was already preparing. They had no throne. They had no crown. But they had defiance. And that was enough to keep the stars burning, until the silence came again.